Ladies and gentlemen, the moment you stop chasing a man who went cold is the exact moment he starts to feel your power. You see, when you pull your energy back, when you stop explaining, stop fixing, stop begging to be understood, that's when everything changes. Because silence isn't weakness, it's strategy. It's the quiet confidence that says, I know my worth, even when you forget it. And in that silence, something incredible happens. He starts to feel the loss, he starts to question himself, and suddenly the one who pulled away is the one who can't stop thinking about you. When a man goes cold, it feels like someone just flipped a switch on your connection. One day he's warm, attentive, texting you constantly, making you feel seen, and the next there's silence. You start asking yourself what changed. You replay every word, every text, every moment, searching for where things went wrong. That confusion turns into anxiety, and that anxiety drives you to reach out, to explain, to fix what feels broken. But here's the truth that most people don't realize: the more you chase his attention in that moment, the further away you push him. Because what's happening isn't just a relationship dynamic, it's a power dynamic. You see, when a man pulls away, it's often not even about you. Sometimes it's about his own emotions, his own uncertainty, or his own need for control. But the moment you start chasing him, you teach him something powerful. You teach him that he can pull back, and you'll do all the work. You teach him that he can withdraw love, and you'll respond by giving more. And that's exactly how you lose your emotional balance. The real power begins when you stop chasing, because when you stop, everything changes. Ignoring him isn't about pretending you don't care. It's about choosing yourself over the endless cycle of trying to win someone's attention. It's about standing back and saying, if you're not matching my effort, I'm not going to keep over-giving. It's a shift from reaction to control. You stop being the one responding to his moods, and you start being the one who decides what kind of energy you will and won't accept. That's what it means to regain control, not over him, but over yourself. The moment you stop chasing, you break that invisible emotional chain that ties your sense of worth to his attention. You stop letting his behavior dictate your self-esteem. Think about how much mental energy goes into worrying about why he's cold, what he's thinking, or if he'll text back. That's energy you could be investing into yourself, your growth, your peace, your happiness. Because every time you beg for attention, you're subconsciously telling yourself that his validation is the source of your worth. But when you pull back, you send a completely different message to both him and yourself, that you are the source of your value. When you stop chasing, you reclaim your power. It's the power of not being emotionally dependent on someone else's actions. You begin to see that silence doesn't mean loss, it means space. Space to breathe, space to think clearly, space to let the truth reveal itself. When you're in panic mode, you can't see clearly. You text out of fear. You act out of insecurity. But when you take that step back, when you stop chasing, clarity starts to return. You begin to realize that your worth was never up for negotiation. It was simply forgotten in the chaos of trying to make someone stay. It's not easy, though. Everything inside of you will scream to reach out. Your mind will convince you that if you just explain how you feel, he'll come back. But that's your anxiety talking, not your power. Because real power doesn't need to beg to be seen. Real power is quiet, it's calm. It's a woman who knows she doesn't have to prove her value to anyone who's blind to it. And ironically, that's what makes people turn their heads again. When you stop chasing, when you stop filling the silence, that absence starts to speak volumes. Men, by nature, notice contrast. They notice when something shifts. When you go from chasing to calm detachment, they feel the change instantly. That's when curiosity starts to kick in. He starts to wonder, what happened? Why isn't she reaching out? Did she move on? That's when you start to become magnetic again. Because now he's the one wondering, he's the one analyzing, he's the one feeling the loss of your energy. But the beauty of this moment isn't in making him come back. It's in realizing that you don't need him to. This shift from panic to peace, from chasing to choosing, is where your transformation begins. You're no longer trying to control the outcome. You're controlling what you can, your energy, your focus, your standards. You start to ask different questions. Instead of, why did he go cold? You start asking, why am I investing so much in someone who's showing me inconsistency? That's a powerful shift in mindset because it moves you from emotional reaction to emotional intelligence. You start recognizing patterns instead of repeating them. You also start to understand that attraction isn't sustained by effort alone. It's sustained by respect. And respect grows when there's space for someone to miss you, to see your absence, to feel what life is like without your energy constantly feeding the connection. When you're always available, always chasing, you remove that sense of longing. But when you step back, when you stop over giving, you allow him to feel what you are bringing to his life. And that's when he begins to realize your true value. However, this isn't just about making him realize anything. It's about something much deeper, realizing that you don't have to chase what's meant for you. That's what self-worth really is, the understanding that you never have to fight to keep someone interested. Because the right person doesn't go cold when they see your worth. They recognize it, they honor it, they rise to meet it. By ignoring him, not with bitterness, but with calm detachment, you're teaching yourself emotional discipline. You're learning how to sit with discomfort without reacting. You're learning how to prioritize your peace over your panic. You're learning how to stand still in the middle of uncertainty and still feel whole. That's power. And that power doesn't just change your relationships. It changes how you show up in every part of your life. The woman who stops chasing doesn't become cold. She becomes composed. She doesn't stop caring. She stops over-investing where care isn't reciprocated. She doesn't stop loving. She just learns to love herself enough not to beg for someone else's love. And that's the kind of energy that commands respect, not from arrogance, but from quiet self-assurance. When you stop chasing, the energy shifts entirely. You go from trying to be chosen to realizing you're the one doing the choosing. You go from asking, will he come back? To saying, if he does, he'll have to show up differently. That's what emotional control looks like. It's not about playing games. It's about refusing to participate in dynamics that drain your worth. Ignoring him is not about pretending he doesn't exist. It's about letting him exist outside the space of your focus until his actions prove he deserves to be in it again. It's not about proving a point. It's about protecting your peace. Because sometimes silence is not the absence of love. It's the presence of strength. When you reach that point, something inside you changes permanently. You start to realize that the chase was never about him. It was about trying to fill a void that only self-respect can fill. And the moment you stop trying to control someone else's attention, you begin to master your own. You stop asking for love to validate your worth, because you've finally remembered where your worth came from in the first place. When you ignore a man who's gone cold, you're not being cruel. You're simply choosing a different kind of communication. You're choosing silence. And silence, when used with confidence and intention, speaks more powerfully than any words you could ever say. Most people think they have to talk more, explain more, or prove more to get through to someone who's emotionally distant. But often, the more you try to explain yourself to someone who's not listening, the smaller your voice becomes. Silence, on the other hand, doesn't chase understanding, it commands it. When a man pulls away, it's tempting to try to win him back with reassurance. You might think that if you just tell him how much you care, if you show more patience, if you prove you're not angry, he'll come around. But what happens instead is that your effort becomes background noise. He stops hearing your words because your energy tells him something different, that he's the one in control, that you'll keep showing up no matter how inconsistent he becomes. Your silence changes that message. Silence interrupts the pattern. It makes him feel the absence of what he used to take for granted. There's a reason silence feels uncomfortable for most people. It creates a mirror. When you stop explaining, you give him space to sit with his own actions. You remove the distraction of your effort, and now all that's left is the reality of what he's done. In that quiet, he starts to hear something new. His own thoughts, his own guilt, his own recognition of your value. That's what silence does. It forces reflection. And reflection is the beginning of change. It's important to understand that ignoring him doesn't mean ignoring your feelings. You can still care deeply, still feel hurt or confused. But instead of pouring those emotions into endless messages or late night calls, you redirect that energy into yourself. You sit with your own emotions instead of demanding him to validate them. You allow yourself to process what's happening without letting desperation lead your actions. That restraint is where your power lies. When you go silent, he notices. He might not react right away, but trust me, he feels it. He feels the missing energy. He feels the space you once filled with warmth, care, and attention. It's like pulling sunlight from a room that was once bright. At first, he might not understand what changed, but over time, the absence starts to weigh on him. Silence creates curiosity, and curiosity leads to awareness. It makes him wonder if you've moved on, if you've lost interest, or if you've realized you deserve better. That wondering creates tension, and tension is the birthplace of attraction. But this silence isn't about manipulation, it's about self-worth. You're not giving him the silent treatment to punish him. You're not ignoring him to make him chase you. You're simply deciding that you no longer want to keep explaining your value to someone who isn't seeing it. You've said enough, you've given enough. Now, the silence becomes your boundary. It says, if you can't meet me halfway, I'm not going to keep walking toward you. It's a boundary wrapped in calm confidence. Silence also reveals truth, not just about him, but about you. When you stop talking, you start hearing your own inner voice again. You start noticing how much energy you were spending trying to get answers from someone who wasn't offering any. You start realizing how much peace you gain when you stop chasing closure from someone incapable of giving it. That realization is liberating because it shows you that closure was never something he could give you. It was something you could give yourself. The beauty of silence is that it's neutral. It doesn't scream, it doesn't beg, it doesn't demand. It simply is. And in its stillness, it becomes the loudest message of all. It says, I'm not fighting for a place where I'm not valued. It says, if you want to talk, you'll have to come to me. And most importantly, it says, I respect myself enough to stop explaining why I deserve love. That's the kind of energy that shifts dynamics. Because when a man realizes that your attention isn't guaranteed, he starts to question the security he felt when you were always available. This is the moment he begins to remember the small things. He remembers the way you used to smile at him. He remembers the warmth in your messages, the way you cared without conditions. And he begins to compare that feeling to the cold silence that now surrounds him. That's when he starts to feel the consequences of his withdrawal. Not because you punished him, but because you stopped compensating for his lack of effort. It's in that silence that your value becomes visible again. When you were chasing, he couldn't see it. Not because it wasn't there, but because your effort made it too easy to ignore. Silence restores contrast. It allows him to feel the difference between your presence and your absence. That's when appreciation begins to grow. But even more importantly, that's when you begin to see how unnecessary it is to beg for recognition from someone who can only see your worth when it's missing. Silence also creates emotional balance. When you're constantly reacting, you're living in his rhythm, his texts, his moods, his timing. But when you stop, when you fall silent, you shift back into your own rhythm. You decide when and how you give your energy. You begin to move from a place of peace instead of panic. That's the moment you stop being controlled by his behavior and start being guided by your own boundaries. That's where self-respect starts to rebuild. There's a quiet confidence that comes from not responding. It's not the same as pretending not to care. It's choosing not to respond from a place of insecurity. It's trusting that what's meant for you won't require you to beg. It's knowing that if he truly values you, your silence won't scare him away, it will wake him up. Because deep down, every man recognizes the difference between a woman who's desperate for attention and a woman who's at peace with her worth. The first chases, the second attracts. When you stop filling the silence, something powerful happens inside you. You stop needing closure to move forward. You stop waiting for his explanation to find peace. You stop expecting someone else to repair the emotional imbalance they created. Instead, you take back ownership of your peace. You remind yourself that silence isn't emptiness, it's healing. It's a pause that allows clarity to surface. Over time, your silence becomes a filter. The wrong man will interpret it as rejection and drift away. The right man will feel it as a wake-up call and step forward with clarity. Either way, silence gives you the truth. You won't have to guess anymore who values you and who only values your effort, because the ones who truly care will not let your silence stretch too long. They'll come forward, ready to talk, ready to listen, ready to meet you where you are. When a man goes cold and you respond with silence, you're not surrendering, you're rising. You're stepping into your highest energy, the one that no longer needs to chase, convince, or prove. You're allowing your absence to do what words couldn't teach him, that your presence is a privilege, not a guarantee. And that awareness, that realization, can only come when you stop explaining and start embodying your worth. Ignoring someone who went cold is often misunderstood. People think it's a manipulative tactic, a game meant to make him chase. But true emotional maturity knows that ignoring isn't about punishment. It's about protection. It's about choosing peace over chaos, clarity over confusion, and dignity over desperation. When you ignore from self-respect, not revenge, you're not trying to teach him a lesson. You're reminding yourself of your own worth. That's where real power begins. When a man goes cold, the natural instinct is to react. You feel the distance, the shift in tone, the slower replies, and you start to worry that you're losing him. That fear can make you do things that go against your self-worth, over texting, over apologizing, or trying to fix something that he's no longer nurturing. But the truth is, you can't fix what someone doesn't want to maintain. The moment you sense that emotional coldness, you're standing at a crossroads. You can either chase his warmth or protect your energy. Choosing silence is not a weakness, it's an act of strength disguised as restraint. Ignoring from self-respect means you're no longer participating in situations where you're undervalued. It's a silent declaration that you won't compete for attention, affection, or effort, because real love doesn't require competition. When you stop chasing, you communicate something subtle but powerful. I am capable of walking away from what doesn't reciprocate. And that's a message that hits harder than any long speech ever could. When you stop responding to his inconsistency, you create emotional contrast. You show that your world doesn't revolve around his behavior. That contrast is what forces him to see the truth. That your calmness is not indifference, it's control. You've stopped feeding the emotional loop where he withdraws and you chase. By breaking that pattern, you re-establish balance. Because the more you react to someone's coldness, the more control you give them over your emotions. But when you stay composed, when you refuse to engage in the emotional back and forth, you silently reclaim that control. Ignoring him from a place of self-respect also changes the way you see yourself. You start to realize how much energy you've been spending trying to prove your worth to someone who couldn't see it. You start to feel the peace that comes from not over-explaining or over-giving. That peace becomes addictive. You begin to understand that walking away isn't losing. It's choosing yourself. And the more you practice this, the less tolerance you develop for half-hearted connections. Because once you experience peace, chaos stops being attractive. There's a common misconception that strong women don't care. But strength doesn't mean numbness. It means you feel deeply, but you choose to act wisely. Ignoring someone who's gone cold doesn't mean your heart is off. It means you're choosing not to waste your energy on someone who's not matching it. You're still capable of love, but you've learned that love without reciprocity is self-betrayal. And once you recognize that, you can't go back to begging for what should flow naturally. This form of ignoring, the kind that comes from emotional intelligence, carries grace. You're not slamming doors, you're just walking away quietly. You're not posting quotes about how you've been hurt, you're healing in silence. You're not trying to prove that you've moved on, you're simply living like you already have. That's what self-respect looks like. Not loud, not defensive, just calm and grounded in your own value. When a man senses that your silence isn't emotional manipulation, but genuine detachment, it disarms him because he realizes that he no longer has emotional control. When you were chasing, he felt secure in your effort. When you stop, he starts to feel uncertain. He begins to wonder what changed, why you're so calm, and whether he's lost his place in your world. That shift in energy creates reflection, and reflection can lead to accountability. But the key is, you're not waiting for that accountability anymore. You've already made peace with the possibility that you may never get it. That's the beauty of ignoring from self-respect. It detaches your peace from his response. You stop needing his apology, his explanation, or his validation to move on. You're no longer tied to the idea of closure because your boundary has already given you clarity. You've said enough through your silence. Your distance becomes the evidence that you value yourself too much to stay where love feels uncertain. And here's what's often misunderstood. Ignoring doesn't always mean cutting off completely. It can mean emotional withdrawal. It means you no longer invest energy in decoding his behavior. You stop checking when he was last online, stop waiting for the text, stop tailoring your life around the possibility of his return. You still show up in life fully. For yourself, your goals, your friends, your passions, but you no longer make him the center of your emotional world. That's emotional detachment, and it's one of the most attractive energies there is. Because when a man sees that your happiness is self-generated, that your peace doesn't depend on his attention, it changes the dynamic. You're no longer the woman trying to earn love. You're the woman who embodies it. You're not waiting for him to see your value. You're living like you already know it. And ironically, that's when most men start to notice. They see the difference. They feel the absence of your emotional availability. They sense that your silence isn't emptiness, it's empowerment. There's also a psychological truth here. People value what they must earn. When you're always available, your presence becomes expected. But when you step back, your absence creates scarcity. It reminds him that your attention is not an unlimited resource. It's something he has to show up for, something he has to deserve. And that realization often awakens something in him, respect. Not because you manipulated him, but because you demonstrated self-discipline. The distinction between revenge and self-respect lies in your motivation. Revenge is reactive. It's about making him feel what you felt. Self-respect is reflective. It's about deciding that you no longer want to feel what his inconsistency caused. Revenge says, I'll show you. Self-respect says, I'll show myself. Revenge needs him to notice, self-respect doesn't. That's why ignoring from a place of dignity is so powerful. It's not about him anymore. It's about you reclaiming your emotional peace. And when you operate from that level of calm detachment, your energy changes. You walk differently, you speak differently, you glow differently. You stop needing to prove that you're over him because your peace already shows it. You stop reacting to every little thing he does because you're no longer anchored to his actions. You've detached your emotional thermostat from his behavior. That's when you truly become unshakable. People often chase because they think love requires convincing. But the truth is, love that requires convincing is not love. It's negotiation. And you're not meant to negotiate your worth. When you ignore from self-respect, you're ending that negotiation once and for all. You're saying, I will not fight to stay where I am not celebrated. That single decision reshapes not just how others treat you, but how you treat yourself. And if he does come back, if your silence draws him closer, you'll meet him from a different energy. You won't be the same woman who was desperate for answers. You'll be the woman who knows that she doesn't need to chase to be chosen. Because now, your silence has built strength, your detachment has built confidence, and your self-respect has built the kind of presence that can't be ignored. There comes a moment in every woman's life when she realizes that her peace is far more attractive than her pursuit. The moment she stops obsessing over what he's thinking when he'll text or whether she said the wrong thing. That's when her power returns. Because the secret power of ignoring a man who went cold isn't about manipulation or punishment. It's about mastering emotional detachment, the ability to care deeply without clinging desperately. Detachment doesn't mean you stop loving, it means you stop losing yourself in the process of love. When you detach, you free yourself from the emotional roller coaster of his moods. You stop taking his silence personally. You stop trying to decode his every move. Instead, you start observing. You notice the difference between a man who's genuinely uncertain and one who's just comfortable with your effort. You start seeing patterns instead of taking pain as a personal failure. That's what emotional mastery is. Not shutting down your heart, but rising above your impulses. Men are highly attuned to emotional energy. They can feel when you're chasing. They can feel when your happiness depends on their attention. That kind of energy, the please choose me energy, doesn't attract, it repels. But when your energy shifts, when you no longer need him to validate your worth, he senses that too. Suddenly, the emotional pressure is gone. You're not waiting, you're not over-explaining, you're not trying to fix things. You've let go. That's when he starts to feel something he hasn't felt in a while. Curiosity. He begins to wonder, what happened? Why is she so calm? Why isn't she chasing? This curiosity isn't born from your silence alone. It's born from your transformation. Detachment changes your energy completely. You become grounded, centered, composed. You no longer react emotionally to every shift he makes. You don't panic when he's distant. You stay calm and observe whether he's capable of showing up. That calmness is rare. It's magnetic. Because a woman who doesn't need to be chosen gives off the aura of someone who already knows her value. And that energy draws people in. When you master detachment, you stop confusing attention with affection. You stop confusing communication with connection. You stop confusing effort with intention. You begin to recognize that love is not about proximity. It's about consistency. And the man who can't give that will slowly fade into the background of your life without you even needing to push him away. Because when you detach, you stop fighting for space in someone else's world and start expanding your own. Detachment doesn't come from coldness, it comes from clarity. You begin to understand that you can love someone and still let them go. You can care about him deeply and still decide that his inconsistency doesn't align with your peace. That kind of emotional intelligence is powerful because it allows you to stay open-hearted without being vulnerable to chaos. It's saying, I love you, but I love me too. It's knowing that letting go doesn't make you weak, it makes you wise. When a man feels that, it unsettles him, not because you're being distant, but because he can sense that your emotions are no longer something he can control. He feels the shift in energy, the way you stopped reacting, the way your life kept moving forward. Suddenly, the dynamic that used to feed his ego no longer exists. You've stopped trying to prove your worth, and now he has to confront whether he was ever capable of appreciating it. That's when he begins to miss you. Not because you disappeared, but because your energy changed from need to neutrality. Detachment also means you stop playing the game of who cares less. You're not ignoring him to appear strong. You're simply not engaging where you're not valued. You're no longer emotionally available to inconsistency. That boundary doesn't need to be spoken, it's felt. It's in the way you stop responding instantly. It's in the way you prioritize your peace over his attention. It's in the way you stop explaining your standards and start living by them. That quiet shift in behavior speaks louder than any confrontation ever could. The beauty of detachment is that it puts you back in control of your emotional narrative. You no longer measure your day by whether he reached out. You stop overanalyzing what his silence means. Instead, you focus on yourself, your goals, your passions, your happiness. You fill your time with things that nurture your growth instead of depleting it. That's when your energy begins to rise again. Because when your focus shifts inward, your glow returns outward. And that glow is what people notice. Men are drawn to women who exude self-possession. It's not arrogance, it's serenity. It's the woman who doesn't need to be chased because she's too busy living a fulfilling life. It's the woman who doesn't overreact to emotional distance because she knows that her peace isn't dependent on another person's presence. That calm, grounded confidence is irresistible. It's the quiet kind of power that doesn't need to shout to be noticed. When you detach emotionally, you also start seeing relationships differently.